Federalist 15, Part 5. Government implies the power of making laws. It is essential to the idea of a law that it be attended with a sanction. In other words, if you pass a law, for it to mean anything, you have to be able to sanction the citizens, penalize the citizens if they don't follow it. Or, in other words, a penalty or punishment for disobedience. If there be no penalty annexed to disobedience, the resolutions or commands which pretend to be laws will, in fact, amount to nothing more than advice or recommendation. This penalty, whatever it may be, can only be inflicted in two ways: by the agency of the courts and ministers of justice, or by military force, by the coercion of magistracy, or by the coercion of arms. The first kind can evidently apply only to men. The last kind must of necessity be employed against bodies politic, or communities or states. It is evident that there is no process of a court by which the observance of the laws can in the last resort be enforced. Sentences may be denounced against them for violations of their duty, but these sentences can only be carried into execution by the sword, in an association where the general authority is confined to the collective bodies of the communities that compose it. Every breach of the laws must involve a state of war, and military execution must become the only instrument of civil obedience. Such a state of things can certainly not deserve the name of government, nor would any prudent man choose to commit his happiness to it. Again, notice he says coercion of arms or coercion of magistracy. He says if the national laws do not have sanction, if they are not able to penalize citizens of different states, that becomes a joke. You can't call it a law anymore. Plus, if it cannot be applied to citizens, it will eventually end up in having to bring a war upon a state. When he says coercion of arms and body politic or community, he says if we keep this trend going on, if we let this confederacy go, it will get to a point that if we want the government to be, the laws to be obeyed, we'll have to come in with military and force that community to do it, to obey the law. And that will only mean war, and we are trying to establish a system where we do not have wars, and we put all our energy, all our money, all our resources for progress and prosperity. There was a time when we were told that breaches by the states of the regulations of the federal authority were not to be expected, that a sense of common interest would preside over the conduct of the respective members, and would beget a full compliance with all the constitutional requisitions of the Union. This language at the present day would appear as wild as a great part of what we now hear from the same quarter will be thought. When we shall have received further lessons from that best oracle of wisdom, experience. Let me read the sentence again. This language at the present day would appear as wild as a great part of what we now hear from the same quarter will be thought, when we shall have received further lessons from that best oracle of wisdom, experience. Remember, they are constantly going back to what has experience taught us. What are the experience of ages? What do history of mankind teach us? What does history of our several states after the revolution teaches us? These are all that oracle of wisdom, experience, what we need to refer to. So he says for those people that tell us, no, don't worry, we don't need to be a union, everybody will follow the law. He says we will be fools if we believe this, because experience has taught us that this is not what has happened. It at all times betrayed an ignorance of the true springs by which human conduct is actuated, and belied the original inducements to the establishment of civil power. Why has government been instituted at all? Because the passions of men will not conform to the dictates of reason and justice without constraint. Let me read that again. Why has government been instituted at all? Because the passions of men will not conform to the dictates of reason and justice without constraint. Means without being able to sanction, without being able to penalize wrongdoers. You cannot establish a government. So he says, do not follow the people who say, oh, we don't need to have a new system. We don't need this new constitution. Has it been found that bodies of men act with more rectitude or greater disinterestedness than individuals? The contrary of this has been inferred by all accurate observers of the conduct of mankind, and the inference is founded upon obvious reasons. Regard to reputation has a less active influence when the infamy of a bad action is to be divided among a number than when it is to fall singly upon one. A spirit of faction, which is apt to mingle its poison in the deliberations of all bodies of men, will often harry the persons of whom they are composed into improprieties and excesses for which they would blush in a private capacity. What he says here in this paragraph will be echoed in what Reinhold Niebuhr said in his book about society of men and individual men. He says, men individually sometimes he uses the word blush, because they know if they do something wrong, individually, they can be pointed out to, they will be caught, and they will not be able to pass the blame onto someone else. But he says here, we are dealing with governments, group of people. They will do wrong things when it's a group of them, because they know if they get caught with the wrong thing, they can always pass the blame to somebody else. So he says, make sure you don't fall for this. You cannot trust a group of people with power. That's the fundamental aspect of what they try to do, they try to talk about in these Federalist Papers. They are distrustful of people who hold power, regardless of who it is. They say experience has taught us that you cannot trust people with power. You have to have a system of checks and balances, separation of powers that will keep everyone with power in check. So keep that in mind as we go to read part 6.